Hello, this video is a summary of the Education Endowment Foundation's report into written feedback. The report is called A Marked Improvement, and there's a link to it at the bottom of the page. Two main problems were highlighted in the report. Firstly, that marking is very time consuming and forms a huge amount of teacher workload, and that much of the teacher marking is not that helpful to students. The report goes on to formulate some guidance of how to improve both of those situations. These main findings are: the feedback we provide should be determined by the type of error made by the student. Secondly, that grades obfuscate any formative feedback given. Thirdly, feedback works best when it is specific and actionable, and also supported with time to respond and resources and potentially further teaching so that students are able to then act upon it. And finally, that teachers should focus their marking efforts on less pieces of work. Instead of marking everything in a student book, the report guides us to focus on the quality of our feedback as opposed to the quantity and frequency of our marking. And this is more likely to lead to a greater progress for our students, provided that the aim of our feedback is to improve the pupils' thinking. And that is not necessarily improving the work that has went, but a revisiting of the main idea being taught. So how might we narrow down what we go about marking? Firstly, we need to decide when more teaching is better than written feedback. Written feedback can only be effective if the students have sufficient understanding of the topic being studied. So before we set about marking a whole set of books, we should sample a class across its ability range, looking for any common errors and weighing up how much the students know. Then we need to make a difficult decision. Where will you have the biggest impact? Is it providing feedback, or is more teaching or more practice on that idea needed before you then reassess the students? We can also narrow down the content that we wish to provide feedback on. So this could be content that is very important for the understanding of your subject. It could be content that is regularly examined, or content that we know students find particularly difficult. We also might want to consider the complexity of the task and the knowledge that the students are working at. We know that simple, straightforward content in simple, straightforward tasks, the best form of feedback we can give is verbal as the students are learning it. When tasks and content becomes more complicated, a delay in the feedback is being shown to be beneficial. Another way we can narrow down what we mark is setting assessment tasks that only focus on a single learning intention. I'm just going to add a little rider in there. That's not always going to be possible. So just narrowing down the field so that your feedback can be very targeted at that point once the students have finished that particular assessment. The alternative to that is if we got a much more open-ended task that we don't mark everything we possibly could within that piece of work. We might want to focus in on one or two specific criteria to give feedback. So for example, if I was marking a student explanation in science, I might just want to mark it for the quality of use of scientific vocabulary, for example. The next bit of guidance states that the use of targets to make marking as specific and actionable as possible is likely to increase pupil progress. So this takes us to the guidance from Dylan William, who suggests that feedback should be provided as a recipe for future action, so that it is broken into small steps, that each step is focused on one idea or one concept at a time, and that there's enough support within the classroom so that the students can follow out those actions set by the teacher. It is really important that any bit of feedback in this sequence is about the content being learned. So we need to plan time for students to respond to our feedback, but also the support that's necessary at that time. So for some students, we know that the written feedback that we give will be enough to improve their understanding. But for others, they may require more explanation. So before we give the feedback back to those students, we need to consider how will we ensure students can get on at that point? What ideas might you need to re-explain so they can respond to the feedback. And there are any students after marking their set of books that you need to target to support them on a more one-to-one basis. This next bit of advice asks us to focus on what causes the error. So we know that errors that are caused by a misunderstanding of the material is best addressed by providing hints or prompt questions which lead the pupils to the underlying principles being studied. However, if it was merely a careless mistake, they're best tackled by simply highlighting the mistake as incorrect and not giving a right answer and allowing the students to then revisit it. Providing prompt questions rather than teacher corrections promotes greater